Back now to our top story today, and conflicting views on the role that the United States should be taking in Syria as that regime continues to brutally attack its own people. Today, 13 more bodies found in eastern Syria. It appears that they were shot execution style with their hands tied behind their backs. You can see it for yourselves in these pictures here. This comes just days after a massacre in Holat that left more than 100 people dead, about half of those victims children, some of whom appear to have been shot at close range. And in one instance, at least, we are told a 9-month-old baby with a pacifier in his mouth, killed by these forces. All of this has Governor Mitt Romney now challenging President Obama on how he is handling the situation, calling on the United States and our allies to arm the opposition so they can better defend themselves. But the White House says that would lead to more chaos and carnage. Who's right? And is this really a political fight that Governor Romney wants to have? Joining me now, Monica Crowley, a radio talk show host and a Fox News contributor, and Mark Hanna, who was an aide to John Kerry and President Obama's presidential campaigns. This is so disturbing what's happening over there. I mean, you know, we are the world superpower, and you're seeing little babies, little children get shot execution style. Little kids like this, we've been looking at this one little girl who, for us, has become the face of the Syrian problem, wandering around in the rubble. You know, little children like that are being massacred by this guy, Monica, massacred by Bashar Assad. And so far, we have done very little. Is Mitt Romney correct to make this a political issue? And separate and apart from that, does he have a point that we should be doing more?
Yes and yes, Megan. Look, what's happening in Syria is an absolute abomination, but it's also very closely related to what happened in Iran in 2009. You remember that the people in Iran revolted against the regime. The regime went in and just slaughtered the people in the streets. And once again, the White House did not respond. And it doesn't necessarily mean military action. A lot of people now are talking about possible military intervention in Syria. It doesn't necessarily have to be
boots on the ground. They're talking more about sort of arming some of the rebels.
Or no-fly zone, yeah, or some sort of military action. But it doesn't even necessarily have to be that. The United States should stand for certain principles: human rights, the ability to express oneself without being slaughtered in the streets. This is how dictatorships act. What I think Romney is saying is, look, the United States has to stand for a certain set of principles. This administration is letting the people down around the world who have the courage to stand up to dictatorships like this, who are killing their own people, and say, we are with you. Here's what we're going to do to try to support you. Beyond just diplomatic leaning on the Russians, for example, who are directly supporting the Syrian regime.
And we can see how well that's working. They're not, they refused to even kick out their ambassador, like we all did. All these countries kicked out their Syrian ambassadors,
there are
not
concrete
Russia.
Things that the United States should be doing, separate and apart from military action. But also, I think the key thing that Romney is saying is about the moral example, the moral support that the United States of America, coming from the president, should be giving to the Syrian people, the Iranian people, and anybody else around the world who shouts for freedom.
We went into Libya. 1,000 people had been killed in Libya by Gaddafi. 10,000 in Syria.
Right. It's easy to make those comparisons without looking at all the details. Now, it's easy. The president has shown, first of all, I want to say our hearts go out to those people, over 100 people, mostly women and children, and it's a horrifying example of what's happening.
That's just the latest, 100 out of 10,000 we've seen over the past year.
Absolutely, absolutely. This has been going on for a long time. My college roommate, his family's from Damascus in Syria, and the people here, it's hitting close to home because there are a lot of Syrian Americans that are looking over this. They're
and
saying,
even if you're not a Syrian American, look at that little girl. Look at that little girl. 50 children like her she could have been one of them for all we know. We're just murdered by this guy. And what is the world's superpower doing about it?
Now, what Mitt Romney's doing is reacting very coldly and very quickly in a political sense, and second-guessing not just President Obama, who has shown time and time again that he won't hesitate to use military intervention when America's strategic interests are at risk. So he showed in Libya, like you said, with drone strikes in Pakistan, not to mention the killing of Osama bin Laden and our withdrawal in Afghanistan and bringing that war to a responsible end. So the Obama administration has shown in the Middle East that it has been extremely intelligent when it comes to intervening overseas, especially in the Middle East. You haven't heard Mitt Romney talking or using the word terrorist or terrorists quite a bit because, frankly,
he hasn't.
But
Mark, you're not focusing on my point. What about Syria? What, if anything, more should we be doing? Because I will say that even Ambassador Bolton,
Right.
who's no fan of President Obama's foreign policy, has expressed a reticence about what we are able to do with Syria given its,
Sure.
proxy relationship to Iran.
Yeah, no, Mitt Romney has no business right now second-guessing President Obama. And he's not just second-guessing President Obama, he's second-guessing the National Security Council of the United States, the House Intelligence Committee, including many leading Republicans who said arming the opposition isn't the answer. And he has a very short-term memory, because if you think back on all the different revolutions we've supported with military and selling arms and throwing arms at the problem, the road to sort of dictatorships in that part of the world is paved with America's best intentions for supporting rebel.
And we had an expert yesterday who came on the show, Monica, and said that this is basically a civil war over there, and that's the last thing we need to be getting in the middle of. And yet, look what's happening.
Well,
look at that girl. Look at the other girls like her. Look at the women and children being massacred, point blank range, going door to door.
I mean, this is clearly a moral outrage, what's happening, and I think that's what Mitt Romney, who has every right to raise this point against his opponent. We are in a presidential election cycle. President is running essentially on a foreign policy record because he can't run on his economic record, so all of these issues are fair play. So Mitt Romney is right to raise it. The point is that Syria is a very complicated situation. The Russians are close allies with the Syrians. They are now arming Assad.
I thought we had a reset with the Russians.
Yeah,
on our
right,
relationship
Meg.
with the Russians.
Right.
I mean, that we would be a better position to exert some influence on them.
The Cold War never ended. Putin is back in charge. The Russians are constantly arming and supporting our enemies around the world. That has never ended.
And this is
also,
Mitt Romney's
but
view.
let me just finish. The Syrian relationship with Iran is also very complicated. So nobody's saying that there's an easy solution to this, which Bashar al-Assad also knows, by the way. The problem for this administration is that they have chosen to essentially arm rebels and overthrow regimes that have been fundamentally pro-American, whether it was Mubarak in Egypt or Gaddafi in Libya. Meanwhile, the anti-American regimes like Assad in Syria or the Iranian regime, they're allowed to crack down and slaughter their people without any kind of words from the United States, any kind of action of moral support for those people. I find that completely upside down and outrageous.
Do we need to worry about, I mean, one thing we don't want to do is aggravate the hatred in the Muslim world, of the radical Muslim world of Americans. And we do have to worry about our own strategic interests and our safety when it comes to things like that by not getting involved in too many conflicts that don't hold broader implications for the United States. Here, it's a humanitarian crisis. It's not necessarily that we need to save the Syrian people, but that there's a moral obligation argument.
But Syria is also strategically important to the United States, where Libya was not.
With Libya, with
Libya
Lebanon,
was not strategically important.
But no, that's absolutely a consideration. This administration has done a tremendous amount of work to restore America's standing in the world and the reputation of America as the world sees it. That's a secondary consideration when you're talking about the human rights abuses and the massacres that are happening there. One thing that everybody can agree on in the United States is, look, we have two things: protecting the safety and security of the Syrian people to the best of our ability, and then second thing is making sure we don't escalate this sectarian civil war, or actually creating a sectarian civil war. It's a tinderbox over there. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a professor up at MIT and says, for Mitt Romney to come out and say that we're going to just arm the Syrian people and have this overthrow happen that way, I mean, it shows a lack of responsibility. It shows a lack of judgment about a foreign policy. I mean, this is a candidate who has said the president doesn't need to be a foreign policy expert. When it comes to crucial matters of America's foreign policy, he's going to sit down with his attorneys.
I got to go, but I do want to say General Jack Keane was on the show yesterday, and he talked about the possibility of anti-aircraft weapons, communications equipment, and so on. There are, small arms potentially. I got to go, but
there are a lot of things. Look, remember that the intervention in Syria was based on this rationale coming from one of Obama's top foreign policy aides, Samantha Power, called responsibility to protect. And yet he doesn't apply that to the people of Syria, and he did not apply it to the people of Iran.
But this is this is still unfolding, and it bears mentioning that the Obama administration has taken nothing off the table. So Mitt Romney can come out and say anything he wants while it's happening, but it's still happening.
There's no easy answer. I mean, I think we all agreed even before we got started in this segment, there's no easy answer here, and it's really disturbing. Guys, thank you both so much.
You bet.
Mark, Monica.
Thank you.